Yes, she did.
Just to you?
She came over. She's gonna be.
Yeah, he ended up sending it to me for stuff, but then anyway, it was kind of
Oh.
No, ya lo van a traer.
Good, how are you? How much going back and forth to New York are you doing? Are you?
Pretty much.
Yeah,
Almost every week.
is that right?
Warmer.
Before the warmer. I represent.
Okay. So it's the flight is great. I mean, it's great. I'm in Philadelphia, but it's basically the same flight. Having a direct, frequent flight is quite nice. No worries.
We're ready.
Exacto. Sí.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Mira qué bien.
What? Oh, engineering. Oh,
Pero usted de aquí. Ok. Sí. Muy buenos días. Mi nombre es José Carrión, soy el presidente de la Junta Fiscal. Bienvenidos todos a nuestra reunión. Voy a cambiar al inglés. I'm going to ask for all of our attendants here this morning that we conduct a cooperation in conducting a productive meeting with civility, including keeping cell phones in silent mode and abstaining from conversation and comments. I'd like to conduct a roll call to determine which members are present. Mr. Biggs?
Here.
Mr. Garcia?
Present.
Judge Gonzalez?
Present.
Mr. Gonzalez?
Present.
Mrs. Mato Santos?
here.
Professor Skeel?
here.
Elias Sanchez?
Here.
Welcome, Elias, to the board.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here. A quorum being present, now the meeting is called to order. ¿Quién está aquí del gobierno?
No sé. Está por tela, pero
Secretario de Estado.
no lo veo.
Okay. All right. I would like to ask our attorney, Martin Bierenstock, from the board's lead counsel, Proskauer Rose, to act as secretary for this meeting. Thanks to all of you in attendance at this fourth meeting of the board in Puerto Rico, and also everyone that is watching the live stream of the meeting via the board's website, www.oversightboard.pr.gov. I am pleased to say that the audio of this meeting via the webcast is available in both English and a simultaneous Spanish translation. If you log into the English website, the audio will be in English, and if you log into the Spanish website, you will hear the simultaneous translation. The board would like to thank El Conquistador, the business center, for hosting us, and we would like to thank the government of Puerto Rico, the superintendent of the police department, and the entire police department for their collaboration in organizing this meeting. Today, the following 8 topics are part of our agenda. Number 1, approval of the 11/18/2016 meeting minutes. A report by the chair. Number 3, administrative matters. Number 4, presentation of fiscal plan targets of January 18th, 2017. Number 5, presentation about government liquidity and bridge between 2014, audited statements and fiscal plan baseline, and Q&A with the government of Puerto Rico officials. Consideration of the governor's request for a fiscal plan and stay extension is the 6th point that will be discussed today. The 7th will be discussion of milestones and timeline for fiscal plans covered entities. And finally, public comment. The main areas of today's work are, number 1, progress toward a fiscal plan that the board will certify. At the board's 3rd meeting, the board expressed its desire to certify a comprehensive and inclusive fiscal and economic growth plan on or before January 31st, 2017. Unfortunately, the outgoing governor declined to revise his proposed fiscal plan that the board had declined to certify, and the new governor, inaugurated this month, understandably requested more time. The board has recently met with the new governor at Fortaleza and has been working with his representatives on fiscal plan issues. Today, you will hear about the fiscal plan targets and its rationale referred to in the board's letter of January 18th, 2017 to Governor Rosselló Nevares, which letter the governor responded to on January 20th of this month. Number 2, government liquidity and bridge from last audited statements to the present. The board has consistently focused on Puerto Rico's liquidity situation, on the government's effort to maintain liquidity, and on more effective reporting of the government's cash position and priority of payments. The board has also consistently identified the review of the bridge between Puerto Rico's last audited financial statements and the fiscal plan as a key priority, and is retaining an accounting firm to conduct the review. Number 3, the governor's request for extensions. In the governor's letter of January 4th, 2017, the governor requested the board to extend the promesa stay and the deadlines for submission of a fiscal plan. The board's letter of January 18th set for certain conditions for the extension, and the governor's representative here with us today, Mr. Sanchez, advised the board by letter dated January 22nd how the government was agreeing to and satisfying the conditions, including the board's milestones. The board will explain its position on the extensions today. Number 4, fiscal plans of covered entities. Pursuant to Section 201A of PROMESA, the board will establish a schedule for the submission of fiscal plans for other covered entities in the near term. Notwithstanding that these fiscal plans will be submitted later, you will hear today how the board has already been meeting with creditor representatives and with the government present, most of the major covered entities having significant debt loads. And lastly, 5, appointment of an executive director. The board will announce today the appointment of its executive director. Let us then move on and take up the agenda for today's work. Approval of the minutes for the last meeting. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the board's last meeting, held once again on November 18th. The proposed minutes are included in your meeting materials as Appendix A. Does anyone have any questions regarding these minutes?
So I have a small suggested change, and that is I wrote the minutes. So it's a change to my own minutes. I think we should have the word minutes on the first page. It doesn't say minutes, just a very small typographical kind of change.
Does anybody have any objection to this highly controversial change?
Duly noted.
There being no objection, I would like to ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
Oh, sorry. I move to approve the minutes of the board with as amended. I approve the minutes of the board meeting on November 18th, 2016, in the form presented to the meeting with the change suggested by Mr. Skill.
Does anyone second the motion?
I second the motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, can we have a show of hands, please? First in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Super. All of the members having voted in favor of the motion, the minutes are approved. Let me continue now by providing the board with my report. The board, as you know, has been established under PROMESA And the board's purpose is to provide a method for Puerto Rico to achieve fiscal responsibility, including pro-growth fiscal reforms, access to the capital markets, and infrastructure revitalization. The board is also tasked with working with the people of and the government of Puerto Rico to create the necessary foundation for economic growth and to restore opportunity to the people of Puerto Rico. At our 3 previous public meetings, I have recounted the board's formative steps as required or allowed by PROMESA to accomplish its statutory mandates. Today, I will restrict my remarks to progress made after the 3rd public meeting on November 18th of last year. The board has worked with its advisors and with many government representatives to identify shortfalls in the government's revenues to cover expenses and to identify steps necessary to enable the Commonwealth to balance its budget as a foundation for economic growth and restoring opportunity. The board's letter dated January 18th of this year to the governor summarized many of the board's major findings to date and specified savings and other steps required to re-establish the Commonwealth's creditworthiness and ability to grow its economy. Importantly, the board also acknowledged the governor's ability to make policy decisions that deviate from the board's recommendations, as long as they produce sufficient savings and increase revenues to accomplish PROMESA's requirements with a substantial degree of certainty acceptable to the board. Accordingly, there may be room for some of the differences with the board's approach, which differences were identified by the governor in his letter of January of this year, January 20th. As long as the ultimate fiscal plan is based on solid savings and revenue projections, a once-and-done approach, and not simply on hopes or predictions that various changes will generate more revenues in the future. I think that bears repeating. As long as the ultimate fiscal plan provided by the government is based on solid savings and revenue projections, a once-and-done approach and not simply on hopes or predictions that various changes will generate more revenue in the future. From the executive search process that the board is conducting, the board expects to resubmit to the governor of Puerto Rico during the first quarter of 2017 a list of at least 3 candidates for the position of revitalization coordinator that may carry forward the initial foundational work laid out by Mr. Aaron Bielenberg. The revitalization coordinator has to date assessed the priority infrastructure and energy needs for Puerto Rico and priority critical projects, established a process and criteria to evaluate critical projects proposed pursuant to Title V of PROMESA, engaged with the relevant agencies and officials in the government of Puerto Rico focused on infrastructure development, established a timeline for the launch of the critical projects evaluation process by March 31st in coordination with the government, establish a coordination plan with the government to identify and accelerate critical infrastructure and energy projects in Puerto Rico via interagency coordination and expedited permitting at the territory and federal level. Now I would like to ask Judge Gonzalez to please provide an update as to where we are with regards to litigation activities, please. Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As previously reported, between October 21st, 2016 and October 28th, 2016, the board moved to intervene in 8 actions pending in the United States District Court for the District of Puerto Rico in order to oppose motions filed in each of the actions seeking to lift the PROMESA stay so that plaintiffs could pursue claims related to the constitutionality of the Moratorium Act and related executive orders. In 7 of those actions on procedural grounds, the court denied without prejudice the Oversight Board's motion to intervene, but also denied the plaintiffs' motions, finding that the plaintiffs had not established cause to lift the stay. The net result is that the actions remain stayed as the board sought. Plaintiffs in 2 of the actions, Peaje Investment LLC and Altair Global Credit Opportunities Funds, appealed, and the Oversight Board appealed the denial of its intervention motion. The United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit decided the appeals on January 11th, 2017. In brief, the appellate court affirmed the denial of the stay relief to the Peaje matter, which had claimed the Commonwealth was diverting toll revenues pledged to Peaje to secure bonds issued by the Puerto Rico Highway and Transportation Authority. B, vacated and remanded for a hearing the denial of the stay relief to the Altair Group's bonds issued by the Employees Retirement System, which group had claimed employer pension contributions had been diverted and should serve as collateral for the repayment of the bonds. And C, held in the Oversight Board's favor, reversing the denial of its intervention motion in the Altair litigation. By stipulation dated January 17, 2017, the parties to the Altair litigation agreed that employers' contributions would be segregated and held in an account subject to the lien of the bondholders and defenses thereto. The parties currently await the court's decision in the eighth action, the Lex Claims action, on 4 motions to intervene, including that of the boards, and whether to stay the entire action.
Thank you, Judge. Let us give you a brief report regarding the financial situation of the board. More detail is provided on the website. The financial statement of the board as of December 31st, 2016. For the 6 months ended December 31st, 2016, the board had expenditures of $3,538,229, mostly related to legal expenses and professional services for board advisors, and received a contribution of $14 million from the government of Puerto Rico. The board, as of December 31st, 2016, had a positive fund balance net position of $10,463,944. The unaudited financial statements as of December 31st, 2016 will be posted at the board's website after the meeting. The board is working on detailed budget and will present it for the consideration of the board members as soon as it is completed. Let's move on to administrative matters. Let me please provide an update as to requests for proposals the board has issued. First, on November 2016, after an extensive search process, the board was pleased to retain McKinsey & Company as its core strategic consultant. In November of the same year, the board announced that it had retained Proskauer Rose as its lead counsel and O'Neilly Borges as its local counsel. The board also published an RFP for financial advisors and has interviewed several firms. It is pleased to announce today that it has selected Citigroup Global Markets, which is represented here today. Additionally, to evaluate the bridge between the government of Puerto Rico's 2014 audited financials to the present, the board will select an accounting firm. For certain discrete tasks Citibank does not customarily undertake, the board may retain one or more other firms as necessary. As previously announced, the board launched a search and selection process for the best candidates available at the local and global level for a series of positions created under Promesa, with the executive search firm Heidrick & Struggles, including the positions of executive director, internal legal counsel, and revitalization coordinator. The executive search process with Heidrick is well underway. The identification and selection of an executive director and general counsel has proven more difficult than anticipated, as the board wants to ensure that the selected persons are well aligned with the board's mission, but board members and board advisors have, as a practical matter, filled those roles to date, pending retention of appropriate persons. We are, however, pleased to announce that Mr. Ramon Ruiz Comas has graciously agreed to serve as executive director on an interim basis until a permanent executive director is selected. We thank Mr. Ruiz Comas, who is present here, for his willingness to serve the people of Puerto Rico as executive director. Bienvenido, Ramon. The board is grateful for the many careful and thoughtful responses to the RFPs published by the board. And I am also grateful for the hard work conducted by the selection committees. Since the last meeting, the board, in consultation with its advisors, has formulated a financial disclosure form and protocol in accordance with Section 109 of Promesa, with the forms to be made available on the board's website. B, a code of ethics. C, a procedure to place board contracts redacted for personal identification information on the board's website, and D, amendments to its bylaws designed, 1, to incorporate compliance with Section 109 PROMESA, 2, to adopt its code of ethics, 3, to require the retention of an ethics expert to assist the board in complying with all ethics and conflict rules, and lastly, to enable the board to act by unanimous written consent between public meetings. These documents are part of the board materials and, as appropriate, will be posted at the board's website as soon as possible after this meeting. Now I would like to ask our attorney, Martin Bienenstock from Proskauer Rose, to provide a brief explanation as to the content and substance of these documents and the proposed amendments to the bylaws. Martin? No tiene.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pursuant to Section 101H of PROMESA, the board is authorized to adopt bylaws, rules, and procedures to govern its activities under PROMESA. As the chair has just explained, between the last meeting and this meeting, the board has adopted changes to the bylaws to accommodate the requirements for financial disclosure. Initially, the financial disclosures will be those that the board members provided the President of the United States in connection with their selection and appointment as board members, and afterwards, on a periodic basis, they will be updated. The first disclosures will likely be filed on the board's website by February 28, 2017. Additionally, the bylaws will now provide that the contracts entered into by the board will be posted on the board's website, again, starting approximately February 28, 2017. Because the public meetings of the board are periodic and the board needs to act between public meetings, the bylaws will now provide that the board can act by unanimous written consent between those meetings on the matters that it identifies later in this meeting on which it might act. Largely, they are administrative matters necessary to the board's continuing activities. The bylaws will also provide for a code of conduct for the board members, and this code of conduct, applicable to both the board members and its employees and staff, basically provides for all board members to carry out their duties of loyalty to the board, to disclose conflicts of interest so they will not act on issues on which they have any conflict, to provide their financial disclosure, to keep confidential the deliberations and business of the board except for those things posted on the board's website, to refrain from trading in any securities of the government of Puerto Rico and related entities, or of providing any inside information to others to help them trade, to always conduct themselves as a matter of course in fair dealing with vendors, creditors, to give everyone, the people of Puerto Rico, the government, the creditors, the utmost respect and dignity in our dealings with them, and basically to accord themselves with an unbiased manner with all people with which it needs to transact business, not to retaliate in any way against those who have opinions different from the board, and to maintain fair dealings and respect with dealings with all of its vendors and advisors. Mr. Chair, those are the essential elements of the changes to the bylaws that are being proposed, and the bylaws would be, the amended bylaws, if adopted by this board, would be posted as soon as possible, probably during the coming week.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make the following motion. Resolved the board's bylaws shall be amended to incorporate A, the financial disclosure form and protocol developed by the board and its advisors in accordance with Section 109 of PROMESA. B, the code of ethics formulated by the board and its advisors. And C, amendments to its bylaws designed, 1, to incorporate compliance with Section 109 of PROMESA. 2, to adopt its code of ethics. 3, to require the retention of an ethics expert to assist the board in complying with all ethics and conflicts rules. And 4, to enable the board to act by unanimous written consent between public meetings. I also move that the financial disclosure forms of the board members and the signed board contracts be posted at the board's website within the next 30 days.
I'd like to second that motion.
I ask that those board members in favor of the resolution indicate so by a show of hands.
Aye.
By unanimous vote, the resolution is passed.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make the following motion. Resolution: between the adjournment of this meeting and the opening of the board's next public meeting, the board may consider in executive session any and all administrative, retention, contract, and related matters, but may only pass resolutions on those matters by unanimous written consent, which shall include consent by email.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. All board members, please indicate if you are in favor of the motion by a show of hands.
Aye.
Aye.
By unanimous vote, the resolution has passed. I would like to request that Ms. Matos Santos, Mr. Garcia, Mr. Biggs, and Mr. Jose Ramon Gonzalez to present the board fiscal plan targets for the central government detailed in the board's January 18th, 2017 letter to the governor and explain its guiding principles and rationale, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Happy to, and I'll kick us off. First slide, I don't know who has the...
clicker.
¿Tú tienes el clicker? All right, thank you. Wait a second. As was outlined by the prior administration in December and reflected in the board's letter earlier this month, Puerto Rico faces an annual average fiscal gap of $7 billion after fiscal year 2019. The 10-year fiscal gap is 2.8 times the average family median income in Puerto Rico, and to close it would require every Puerto Rican family to contribute an additional $5,400 every year. Just to explain a bit of what's happening to make sure it's clear, as you see, the fiscal gap in 2017 is substantially smaller, and essentially this year the gap has been covered with a combination of not making debt payments as well as delays in payments to vendors and other elements. Why does it worsen? It worsens for two big reasons. One is that the pension funds have depleted their assets, and we're looking at the transition to PAYGO, adding a substantial cost between 2017 and 2019. And the second large component, of course, is the anticipated loss of federal funds based on the end of the funds that were available based on the Affordable Care Act. As you know, PROMESA provides the government of Puerto Rico with a powerful tool to restore opportunity to the people of Puerto Rico. It provides a path to restore economic growth and opportunity through structural reforms, to achieve sustainable balanced fiscal budgets, to restructure Puerto Rico's debt to a sustainable level, and to reform pensions. The letter outlines our approach for how to achieve structural balance and how to use the tools that are available to improve and restore promise in Puerto Rico. And it reflects shared sacrifice while protecting essential services. If I may word on fiscal plans from my perspective, fiscal plan is not a good in and of itself, but it is a good and it is a tool to the extent that it meets Puerto Rico where it is, and it provides an opportunity where it can be, an opportunity to restore growth, restore opportunity. So you know, the board has provided the government with a set of guiding principles. One is a once-and-done approach with a target of a balanced budget by the fiscal year 2019. A second is demonstrated viability through implementation plans for the measures included in the fiscal plan. Another, which is a requirement under the law, is to ensure funding of essential government services, as well as to provide adequate funding for pension systems, to provide capital expenditures and investments necessary to promote economic growth, as well as to include aspirational goals for Puerto Rico and its people. If I may, on the once and done sustainable solution, and a bit on where we're coming from on this. As you know, Puerto Rico's economy has contracted for 9 of the last 10 years. We recognize that debt restructuring is necessary, but we also recognize that while it will be significant, it's not going to be alone. It's alone not going to be sufficient or sustainable as a solution to address the fiscal imbalance that Puerto Rico faces. The scope of the response to the fiscal and economic challenges of Puerto Rico must be commensurate with the problem. Reforms, as we mentioned, will require shared sacrifice, but we'll also need to protect the most vulnerable. Need to focus on structural changes to promote growth and opportunity. A once and done solution requires necessary changes to the structure of the government, spending and revenues to achieve and maintain a balanced budget that adequately supports essential services. As mentioned, debt restructuring is a critical element, and debt restructuring must be focused on achieving a debt level that is sustainable based on realistic economic and revenue assumptions. Changes to the pension systems are also necessary to ensure that the pension systems are sustainable and to ensure that the pension systems achieve the standard required promesa of being adequately funded. As you know, we've outlined a roadmap for closing the fiscal gap in 2019. We also outline the fact that when we're looking at this roadmap, it's looking at how you balance the structural gap. We recognize that there's time required to implement some of these measures, and that the available fiscal surplus in 2019 will inevitably vary from these projections because of carry-in deficits or operating deficits that come in from prior years. We also acknowledge in our letter that the roadmap that we provided did not reflect updated economic assumptions. That would be another element that will be considered between now and the fiscal plan adopted by the board, certified by the board by the date to be determined at this meeting. Just a bit on the roadmap. You know, one piece, this slide is trying to capture kind of why are some of the elements of the fiscal plan and the fiscal roadmap what they are. And when you see significant elements having to do with personnel reductions, with elimination of subsidies, with healthcare spending, with reductions in higher education spending, pension reform, and all of those elements, those are directly related to where the bulk of expenditures are occurring. And in order to close a fiscal gap that is essentially about half of the discretionary spending that Puerto Rico has, once you take into account federal funds, those are the places that one must look to, in addition to, of course, some of the revenue enhancements that are included in the measure.
Okay, let me please cover the part of the revenue that the guideline is to increase non-federal revenue by 15%. As you see on the pie chart on the left, the total revenue estimated for fiscal year 2019 is $15.4 billion. Of that, non-federal revenue, it's roughly $9.8 billion. So the guideline is to improve compliance, to increase the amount of tax that the government collects, also to widen the taxable base to the reduction of exemptions. One critical item which was not included in the baseline assumed that about half of the Act 154 revenues were not going to be present due to the expiration of Act 154. Given the extension, this basically assumes that basically the $1 billion that was off the baseline, assuming that that revenue base can be sustainable. And obviously, this is one of the elements that the board needs to evaluate. There's some potential or considerable pressures over some of those revenues as time goes by with expirations of patents and other issues. So that would have to be evaluated. So the proposal is basically maintaining Act 154 revenues and reviewing the tax regime for Act 154 companies within a reasonable timetable, and also to broaden the corporate tax reform. Also, improving property tax collection through reappraisals and property registration efforts. And the intent is that this would allow to lower the municipal subsidies accordingly. So this will be a measure that, although it will not be reflected directly in the revenues, it will reduce, or it proposes to reduce expenditures of the central government. And finally, right-sizing government fees and tolls. So the sum of all these measures are intended to at least provide $1.5 billion by the year 2019.
The next category we identified is to right-size government by 22% through efficiency and reduction. As we mentioned, this 22% is a net number. There are some embedded costs that have to be offset, including potential costs if there are reductions in personnel on occasion that results in increases in pension costs and the pay-go obligations, as well as the embedded costs associated with transitioning public safety personnel and teachers into Social Security. The base of spending that we're talking about in this area is about $7 billion, and our guideline is that the savings in this category need be about $1.5 billion, come from a combination of different measures. Portion of it, about $200 million, comes from a reduction in procurement and reduction in expenditures of at least 10%. Also, an embedded assumption of replacing subsidies to municipalities and eliminating direct private sector subsidies. And then a substantial reduction in the area of personnel costs, and that would be done through a combination of reduction of non-essential services, consolidations, headcount reduction associated with elimination of non-essential functions, as well as bringing compensation in line and bringing compensation and benefits in line with private sector compensation and benefits. Healthcare challenges in the fiscal plan. We recognize that Mi Salud is a critical element of Puerto Rico's safety net and is fundamental to the stability of the healthcare delivery system. We also recognize that Puerto Rico, like many states, many businesses, has been challenged by rapidly rising healthcare costs that far outpace realistic revenue growth. The combination of those rapidly rising healthcare costs, the percentage of expenditures, so the roughly $3.5 billion out of a base of about $13.5 billion that is spent on healthcare, and the anticipated loss of at least $1.2 billion in Medicaid funds by the end of this calendar year and the beginning of next calendar year makes significant reductions in healthcare spending necessary. The board supports initiatives to seek additional federal healthcare funding, but we do not believe that at this time it would be prudent to include in the fiscal plan any such potential federal action on healthcare funding. Thus, our guidelines recommend that there be reductions in healthcare spending of about 28% to address a large share of the loss of federal funding. That would be a reduction of about $1 billion by fiscal year 2019 through a combination of measures: streamlining operating costs at healthcare agencies, reducing Mi Salud operating expenditures, improving efficiencies, things like reducing non-emergency visits, reducing the duration of hospital stays, it will also include some reduction of healthcare services, increased share of cost for services, so folks paying for a larger share of, say, their prescriptions, their doctor's visits, their visits to emergency rooms or hospitals, as well as reduction in the scope of drug coverage provided. It could also include elimination of non-life-threatening benefits, things like glasses, things like dental, other elements that are included in the benefit that may have to be scaled back, as well as reductions in the number of Puerto Ricanos covered through the Mi Salud plan. All efforts should be taken to sequence initiatives to avoid cuts that inhibit access to essential care and overly stress the public healthcare system. We recognize that Mi Salud is not only an important program for purposes of the services that it provides to eligible Puerto Ricanos, but we also recognize that it's an important revenue stream and important to the stability of the healthcare delivery system, particularly the hospital networks, and that reductions in this area must be done with a great deal of care.
I'll pick it up in higher education. Education takes up about 10% of the Commonwealth revenues. Therefore, it is really inevitable that it also have to share in the reductions of expenditures that we are contemplating. In our model, expenditures for higher education would have to be reduced by fiscal year 2019 in the amount of approximately $300 million. The University of Puerto Rico, which is a critical asset long-term for the growth of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, will have to address this reduction both on a revenue side and on the expense side. On the revenue side, we believe the university can address a means-based tuition system to generate more revenues in line with Pell Grant subsidies and what other peer institutions do. On the expense side, it is highly likely the university will have to address expenses both on the academic and non-academic operating expense side, including headcount and consolidation of programs and potentially campuses. Attracting new sources of revenue would be highly desired, although a somewhat speculative source of potential new revenues at this point in time. And this might be in the form of increased out-of-state or international students and federal grants that it may still avail itself of. Next is pensions, yeah.
Thank you. As Ms. Matasantos mentioned, as all of you well know, public employee pensions pose a significant challenge here for the government budget and for the economy. The benefit costs for the main public employee pension plans as a percentage of gross national product are more than twice as high as they are in the average in the 50 states, and yet the two main pension plans here are practically insolvent, meaning that they are almost out of assets with which to pay benefits to retirees. We believe that it is possible to reduce benefit costs by roughly 10%, but we believe that those reductions should be made in a way that focuses on protecting benefits for those who are most dependent upon them, and also recognizing that certain public employees, notably teachers and public safety workers, often are not enrolled in Social Security and don't have those benefits to rely upon. So we believe that any reductions in benefit payments should target those with higher benefit payments and bear in mind differences in Social Security coverage. Going forward, we believe that public safety and education employees should be enrolled in Social Security to provide them with diversified sources of income once they retire. We also believe that the contributions that are being made by current employees should be segregated in accounts owned by those employees to ensure that the contributions made by workers today will be available to them to pay benefits once they retire.
Now, the expenditures and revenues are not the only issue the fiscal plan addresses, of course. The fiscal plan also has to address capital expenditures and investment in infrastructure, which is necessary to sustain economic growth while catalyzing private investment in Puerto Rico. The key issue here is that the Commonwealth has basically no access to the capital markets until we get to a point of sustainable fiscal equilibrium and a clear path forward from out of the fiscal crisis. And because all infrastructure in Puerto Rico historically has been financed through the issuance of bonds in the capital markets, this is a very significant limitation that we also have to address. In the short term or in the near term, this is probably best addressed with a broad-based partnering with the private sector, particularly in areas like transportation and power, and the development of public-private partnerships for investment in needed infrastructure, which may not be done in the near term solely by the public sector investment. We have to really focus on prioritizing projects and delivering results in key strategic areas. And this, of course, is supported by Title V of PROMESA and the Board's Revitalization Coordinator, which has special powers to facilitate the expediting of projects. Finally, moving forward requires creating a sustainable capital structure for Puerto Rico, which requires, as you have seen, addressing a very critical and diverse combination of fiscal levers and debt restructuring. The current baseline projections show fiscal deficit of around $4.8 billion by 2026 before the servicing of any debt obligations. So the problem exists even before you even consider supporting any debt obligations. Therefore, even after potential fiscal measures, the current debt load is not sustainable, with over $3 billion in debt service due for each of the next 10 years. Thus, a sustainable fiscal plan will need to restructure debt obligations to align to a realistic and achievable go-forward surplus. And it has to be a plan that includes a debt sustainability analysis to help understand what level of debt can realistically be serviced after implementation of the fiscal measures. And this leads to the board guidance to the government of Puerto Rico.
So let me finish just by providing a summary of our letter of January 18th by providing our guidance to the government of Puerto Rico. I mean, as we all know, I mean, PROMESA offers an opportunity for recover that will require tough choices, as it is part of what has been outlined in this presentation. But it also allows the possibility for a better future. And we just want to provide 8 points that summarize what a responsible fiscal plan should include. I think the first one, very critical, is to be honest, realistic, and balanced, to be able to be balanced among all the different stakeholders, and also to propose a once and done solution. I think Puerto Rico has suffered for too many years of basically kicking into the future some of the measures and solutions that everybody knows. So as it was explained by Ms. Matos Santos, the once and done solution doesn't mean that it will be done everything on the shortest period of time. I mean, it has to be provided for a reasonable period of time to be able to be realized, but it has to be done certainly under a once and done solution. Second point is to be sure that it funds essential services, as it is one of the critical elements of the PROMESA Act. Third is to make pension systems sustainable, to protect the lowest income retirees, and to strengthen the future safety net for teachers, police, and firefighters. Fourth, to deal with the healthcare challenges and the anticipated federal funding loss. As it has been indicated by the board several times, I mean, the board supports all efforts in order to be able to obtain additional federal funding for our Medicaid programs. But until that happens, it is our view that the healthcare challenges need to be attended to, and a plan needs to be in place to anticipate for that potential federal funding loss. Next point is to be sure that the plan protects working people and the most vulnerable. Obviously, there are many tough choices. The choices needs to be done in a balanced way, but there are many ways and mitigations that can be provided within that plan. Next, to invest in necessary infrastructure, as it was mentioned by Mr. Gonzalez. Seventh, that the timely payment for vendors and taxpayers that support the economy are provided within the fiscal plan. As we know, part of the financing gapping measures that the government has been employing is basically delaying payments to vendors that are providing services to the government, and also delaying refunds to taxpayers. And finally, but very important, is to provide the foundation for growth, job opportunities, and a stronger future. I would like to mention that the fiscal plan will be a dynamic document, and by dynamic, we mean that this is a document that will need to be revised as circumstances change, and it is expected that that fiscal plan should be revised at least annually. I think with that, I mean, we summarize some of the board guidance.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia, Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Biggs, and Mrs. Matos Santos for your presentation. Now let's proceed to the presentation from the government and their liquidity and bridge between 2014 and audited financial statements and fiscal plan baseline, and questions and answers with government officials from Puerto Rico. I would like to welcome Mr. Gerardo Portela, Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Fiscal Agency and Financial Advisory Authority, and members of his team and their advisors, Conway and McKenzie, to present us with a status on the government liquidity and the process of completing the bridge between Government of Puerto Rico's 2014 audited financial statements and the fiscal plan baseline. After their presentation, their board will ask questions from the government about the presentation. Welcome. Could you please sit? Thank you. I neglected to mention the presence of the Honorable Secretary of the Treasury of the Government of Puerto Rico, Secretary Maldonado. Welcome. And I'm sorry, and the President of the Government Development Bank of Puerto Rico, Christian Sobrino Vega. Welcome. Bienvenido. Whenever you gentlemen are ready.
Good morning. My name is Gerardo Portela, Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Fiscal Agency and Financial Authority. On behalf of the FOMB team and the Government of Puerto Rico, we would like to thank esteemed members of the board to let us present today. On January 2nd, our Governor, Dr. Ricardo Rosselló, was sworn in. In the 27 days elapsed, we have been working around the clock to put in place measures and develop tools to achieve fiscal responsibility, compliance with PROMESA, and in an expedited but enduring manner. This sense of urgency permeated all branches of government, and fiscal compliance has become priority number one. Concrete actions have been taken to begin this path to prosperity in executive and legislative branches alike. As you may see in the slide, we put together the first 27 days of our administration in terms of executive orders, laws, bills, and meetings that we've done with different with the bondholders and the different contractors. As you may see, the first executive order, 2017-001, fiscal control measures. This declared a state of fiscal emergency, freeze vacancies and new job posts, order agencies to reduce operating expenses, and order agencies to implement measures to save energy, water by an average of 5%. That was on January 2nd. On January 2nd as well, the second executive order is 2017-003, expedite permits for critical infrastructure projects. This executive order an expedited process for all critical infrastructure projects such as energy, production, water, waste, and management. On January 2nd as well, the third executive order, 2017-005, put the zero-based budgeting for all agencies, with the goal to at least 10% savings in each agency. Shortly thereafter, on January 7th, the governor executed the fourth executive order, additional fiscal control measures. This one ordered all agencies to reduce 5% in purchases for the remainder of the fiscal year. In line of that, there has been simultaneous legislative actions. geared towards fiscal responsibility, compliance with PROMESA, and economic growth. First law, on January 11th, it was an enhancements to the public-private partnerships. This broadened the scope of potential projects and streamlined the approval process. Increased the participation of local investors in P3's arrangements, and possibly inject the liquidity into the employee retirement system. The second law, which was the enactment of the new FOMB organic law, this expanded the capabilities to create a robust fiscal agency. It also broadened the scopes of the financial advisory side, the fiscal agency side, and the disclosure agency side. This in lieu to have the ability to obtain, analyze, and disclose essential financial data from all agencies and government corporations, monitor compliance with the fiscal plan, and serve as a vehicle to communicate with the board. Third law it was approved on the 26th of January, enacted the Labor Transformation and Flexibility Act with intent to improve conditions for job creation in the private sector. Additionally, several measures for economic development and revenue creation are in the legislative pipeline, such as House Bill 0451, which is the Act 154 extension, Senate Bill 001 of 2017, which is Enterprise Puerto Rico, Senate Bill 004, 2017, Destination Marketing Organization, DMO. I would like to express also that also on January 11th, we engaged our legal advisors, Denton's. On the 17th of January, we hired our financial advisors, Rothschild, both present today. As you may know, on the 18th and 19th, we also started engaging bondholders. On the 27th of yesterday, a press release came out in regards with the RSA as well, which we extended the RSA of PREPA. I wanted to also express that FOMB has assembled an excellent management team and engaged key consultants who have assisted us in the process of defining the scope of our complex liquidity issue. Our goal is that Puerto Rico can climb out of this financial crisis and thereafter avoid the past practices that led to this juncture. In the next page, next slide. On January 4th, Mr. Elias Sanchez requested an extension of the deadline for submitting the fiscal plan. Shortly thereafter, on January 18th, this board asserted that it would indeed consider our request contingent upon the government's meeting and adhering to the conditions. These conditions are expressed here, but I want to reiterate to the board that these conditions and deliverables are in draft form and are ongoing basis in collaboration with the board and its consultants. And we would like to have that feedback from you. Also, our compromise is to keep working with the board continuously to keep improving such items. And there's seven items. First is showing commitment to working towards a one and done approach with no consideration of short-term liquidity or near-term financing. We are aligned with you. Development and implementation of a liquidity plan to address anticipated cash shortfalls through the duration of the stay. Draft is being presented today. The visibility on the cash positions, 13-week rolling cash flow for sustainability of all government budgets. That draft is being presented today. Provide a document detailing the bridge between 2014 audited financial statements and the fiscal plan baseline. That draft is being presented today. Scale of important milestones we've completed with working alongside the board and its consultants. But it's the establish a joint working arrangement, sharing information protocol working plan. It's also an ongoing process. And as the Title VI negotiations conducted will be in joint coordination with the board and this government, we're aligned as well. It is our position that we have complied or we're on, as an ongoing basis with the board's request, and we'll keep working with the board alongside the board. And on behalf of the government, we respectfully request that this board grants an extension of the deadline for the filing of the fiscal plan and extends the automatic stay. Now I will leave you with our advisors, Conway McKenzie, who will present the liquidity status update, including a 13-week cash flow projection and a document detailing a bridge between the 2014 audited financial statements and the fiscal plan baseline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Portela, and thank you, Chairman and members of the board. I'm Aurelio Garcia Miró, and I'm here with my colleagues Jeff Addison and Mauricio Sanchez from Conway McKenzie. Today, we will present an update on the TSA liquidity, followed by a progress report on the bridge between the 2014 financial statements and the fiscal plan baseline. The presentations we will be addressing today are the result of intensive collaborative work with the new government and its recently appointed officers, especially at AFAF and Hacienda. We have also been engaged in several discussions and coordinations with the board advisors. Importantly, we want to highlight the government's important efforts in addressing the critical areas surrounding the board's various requests, and we appreciate all efforts made so far in providing us with available information. The improvement of some key accounting and reporting processes and systems is a challenge that the new government has identified as a key priority to continue enhancing transparency in cash and financial reporting. In regards to the bridge that we will present between the 2014 financials and the fiscal plan, the information that we have as of today is still in preliminary form. Therefore, what we're going to be presenting is a progress report. The government and its advisors are in the process of progressively working on assessing and analyzing information that will lead to conclusive considerations in the next few weeks. Now, I would like to ask Mauricio to share our update on liquidity.
Thank you, Aurelio. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Mauricio Sanchez. I'm a Managing Director of Conway McKenzie, and I have been working with the government of Puerto Rico over the last couple of weeks to develop a set of liquidity projections that we are about to present here. I'd like to focus our presentation today on responding to two important requests from the board. I think the first and foremost, which is the request that the government provide a liquidity plan that is self-funded, that doesn't require any external financing from here through the proposed extension of the current stay through April 30th. The question is that possible? Can the government survive with its own internally generated cash flow? The answer to that question is yes, and we'll get to that in the details in a minute. The second thing that I'd like to accomplish today is to walk you through the differences between the current set of projections that we are presenting today and the ones that we presented back in November to the board, and talk through some of the variances and some of the permanent variances that you will see, some of which are favorable to the government, and so that you can understand and level set the expectations for the remaining of the year, and more importantly, between now and through the end of the proposed extension of the current stay. But before I get into that, I would like to just talk a little bit about process. As I said, we've been working with the government, with the new administration now for the last couple of weeks, and this has been a very collaborative effort with the Hacienda team, with the AFAF team. We have been working hand in hand with the secretary's staff at Hacienda in going through their internally generated cash flow projections, sort of making sure that on a run rate basis, it makes sense. Trying to understand what's timing, what is permanent, and trying to smooth out the projections through the next couple of months. So what we will present to you today here is on a monthly basis through the end of the year what liquidity looks like. And then, we'll get into the details of what the 13-week cash flow looks like at the TSA level. So that's actually a very important clarification, just to make sure that everybody understands. We're talking about, TSA, the Treasury Single Account, which is the account through which approximately 2/3 of the cash flows of the government flow, as you well know. This presentation does not include, the large instrumentalities and component units like PREPA, PRASA, and others. And certainly, this liquidity presentation does not include the pension system. That's obviously a separate conversation, but, again, roughly 2/3 of the cash flows, as you well know, flow through the TSA, the Secretary's account. With that said, one more thing on process and issues that, obviously need to be addressed here over the next few weeks is, as it relates to information and making sure that you guys have the visibility that you need to, over the next short term, be able to tie out some of these cash flow items to specific, funds and specific, agencies and line items. Right now, and as you well know, it's been a challenge to get that sort of reconciliation so that you can, cleanly and easily, tie out your TSA cash flows to the fiscal plan, for example, or the general budget, or federal funds, special revenue funds, and so forth. We are working hand in hand with the folks at FAF and Treasury in developing a framework so that we can tie out the data that's resides currently at Treasury and Popular. So that we can develop, better reporting mechanisms to be able to close that gap. And we hope that we can do that here over the next few weeks. We still haven't finalized a work plan to that. We're working on that, and as soon as we have that, we will obviously share that with the board. But that's the objective ultimately when it comes to cash flow and liquidity, to be able to understand really what is driving the swings. Is it mismatch in federal fund appropriations versus the expenditures? Is it a timing issue? Is it the special revenue funds that's causing the problem? Is it AP? What is it? So little by little we're getting there. But obviously, much work remains to be done on that front. So with that said, I'd like to point you to page 6 of the deck. And what we are showing here, the two key takeaways that I'd like you to take from this page are, number one, on the top panel, you will see that, the liquidity wall, as it stands relative to current law, is clearly, unsustainable, and it's going to happen absent the extension of the stay. And that message is essentially the same message that we delivered back in November. So absent an extension, next week, the government of Puerto Rico will have a $1.1 billion cash shortfall, which is clearly not sustainable. The bottom panel shows what liquidity looks like in the scenario where the stay is extended for or through April 30th. And as you can see, there is sufficient cash flow to maintain the government operations through that period, but inevitably you will face another liquidity cliff coming April 30th. However, with that said, this liquidity picture shows that the government will have sufficient time to put in place a revised fiscal plan and enter into negotiations with its creditors and other stakeholders. One of the things that I would like to point out here on this page is the fact that the operating, if you look at the net cash flows pre-debt over the course of the next few months, in either scenario you will see that it's for the full year is about $207 million, but on a prospective basis, that number is roughly $152 million. And what that says is, right now you have, roughly $189 million in the bank. If you were to extend, that through the end of the year, you're looking, at an ending cash balance of roughly, $37 million. This is, in a hypothetical world where you just extend, the stay, if you will, through the end of the year. And then I wanted to point that out because I wanted to give the board a flavor or a sense for what the sort of the run rate net cash flow of the government is. And there are a lot of assumptions, of course, embedded into that cash flow, and I'll walk you through the most important ones. The key one is, what's happening with AP? What is the assumption as it relates to accounts payables outstanding to vendors and the pay down embedded in these projections. These projections assume that the government will pay down approximately $237 million of accounts payable outstanding between the beginning of the fiscal year and in June 30th of 2017. What that means from a total sort of AP standpoint, it means that you are going from roughly $1.556 billion to about $1.3 billion. And what that means in terms of days payables outstanding is that you go from approximately 180 days, which is kind of the number that we estimated at the beginning of the year, to roughly 147 days at the end of the year. So still not an optimal level of accounts payable outstanding, clearly. But the cash flow that you are looking at assumes a certain level of accounts payable pay down. The second important assumption that's embedded in these projections is tax returns. As you well know, together with accounts payable, tax returns have been historically the two levers that the government has had to play with liquidity, so to speak. And what we have in these projections is a total pay down of, or a total outlay related to tax returns of $810 million. And of that $810 million, roughly, 2 to 250, we quite don't have that number yet, but we approximate roughly 2 to 250 relates to prior years outstanding tax returns.
I'm sorry, when you say tax returns, you mean tax refunds or?
I'm sorry, tax refunds.
Tax refunds.
Tax refunds.
Okay.
So it
Sorry if I may, just so
Sure.
essentially is part of what happens that in the first half of a fiscal year you're making greater use of the accounts payable delays as well as tax refunds, in part to deal with the sales tax segregation, and then in the second half of fiscal year there's a difference and there's a little more flexibility on that side?
there is a little bit more flexibility just simply because of the liquidity profile of the Commonwealth. The first half, you're paying out COFINA, so you don't have enough cash flow to make these types of payments. And then the implication here is that, again, through the end of the year, you'll make a little bit of progress with your vendors, and with your taxpayers. What the $800 million payout or outlay means, as it relates to the tax refunds, is that you will be current by the end of the year with your taxpayers. You will not carry a significant liability going into 2018 fiscal year.
And just if I may, just to make sure I have a clear sense of, if we telegraph then to the first portion of 18, then you start having some of the issues coming in with the pension funds as well as some of the standard cyclical issues that you had this year as you start thinking post June 30th in terms of what that looks like?
That is correct.
Totally correct.
The third assumption in this cash flow projection is a contingency that the new administration has put in here of about $478 million. That in our estimation is a fair contingency to have in here, given all the uncertainties that are out there with respect to pensions. With respect to also, a number of instrumentalities and component units who have or are depending on the pay down of intragovernmental debt outstanding. So I'll give you an example. The Public Buildings Authority has north of $300 to $400 million of payables against the central government, and they're running on a very tight budget this year from an appropriation standpoint. The government has in the past made certain deferrals with respect to paying down credits owed to PREPA and other entities out there that are sort of, if you want to think of them as off-book liabilities, but these are real liabilities and real important sources of cash flow for some of these entities. So that $478 million in our estimation is a fair estimate. I mean, obviously, one of the things that you will see with this cash flow is that it's pretty choppy. It's and it's a result of, again, all of the uncertainty, but also a result of the number of systems issues that you have. So forecasting, the $16 billion machine is a challenge, with the current systems that you have in place. So you're going to have to get used to some choppiness on a weekly, monthly basis. As the systems get better, and as Treasury continues to make progress on getting better visibility out of the data and out of Banco Popular, we expect that it'll be a little smoother ride. But we're seeing some important swings that I will get to in a minute when we get to the bridge part of the cash flow relative to what we shared with you guys back in November. So those are the main assumptions built into this projection. And what I would like to do is take you to page 13. I apologize, we're skipping here a little bit, but this is an important page for everybody to understand what's moved, what has changed since November 18th when we last presented the projections to the board. And here we list the key ones that we have identified in conjunction with the Treasury team as some of the issues in the new forecast that are causing a variance relative to the 11-18 cash flow. So, the first one at top is, well, the first thing is, this bridge is a bridge, to compare on an apples-to-apples basis. This is a bridge that assumes no extension of the stay. So, because that's the forecast that we presented last time around. So, keep it apples to apples. Starting at the top, the $2.181 billion number that you see at the top is the ending cash balance that we forecasted at the end of the year back in November. That number is right now at 2.423. So there's a bit of a swing there, and I'd like to walk you through some of the key items here as far as variances. The first one is a favorable variance related to other inflows. One of the things that we noticed when we sat down with the folks at Treasury is that they were not correctly forecasting inflows related to insurance claims by the health department as they relate to services rendered by state hospitals. And that number through actuals through the month of January was roughly $40 million. So what we've done is we've sat down with them to understand, the timing and permanent related issues, and we developed a view of what should be forecasted in that line, and that number is the $88 million that you see there. So that is, an amount that relates to unbudgeted or not forecasted inflows in the prior presentation. The next number that you have right below is the $82 million related to HTA. This is a pass-through revenue that comes into the TSA, and the TSA immediately passes through to the authority. That number is a favorable variance of $82 million because the expense has been lower, and the expense has been lower, our understanding is because economic activity has not been as robust as previously anticipated. As you know, some of these dollars come through, gasoline taxes and that sort of thing. So, it's a favorable variance that has an offset in the revenue. And, the issue is that we, again, back to systems issues, we couldn't really pinpoint exactly where in the revenue, this number was. And what we are saying in this bridge is, look, we identified the favorable variance in the expense, but there's an offsetting effect in revenue in the contingency. So that 82 is offset down below. The next item that we have here is a favorable variance related to federal funds. And again, just like the pass-through funds at HTA, these are, they come in and they go out relatively quickly. We expected, when we were first looking at this number, it looked a lot higher than this, but we identified an offsetting effect in the assessed line. And this number is a net number that we believe needed to be revised based on the trend and based on prior history. So we think this is a positive variance to the cash flow as it relates to federal funds on a net basis. The next item relates to the sales and use tax. And again, this is a favorable variance, and is 100% of this $54 million was captured in the year-to-date period through January. So the explanation that we think is behind this variance is just simply better enforcement, better capture rates. We did not extrapolate that into the future. I mean, it's hard to do that, especially now that a lot of the new systems are just being put in place at Hacienda to better capture and better get information from vendors across the island. We just don't have enough certainty to say that this is a number that will stay and hopefully will double over the course of the next 5 months, but we left it intact. So this is a number that is an actual number. The next item relates to payroll and pension benefits. We extrapolated 34 for the full year. 26 of that relates to the 7-month period ending in January. So the bulk of it is already captured in the actual numbers. We are probably being a little conservative here by not extrapolating it further, but we just didn't have enough data, at the granular agency level, and candidly, not enough time to do, a robust analysis on that. So the 34 is our best estimate for, the impact on a full year basis. $55 million of other, that's just an amalgamation of a billion things. And then the next one is $138 million negative variance with respect to tax refunds with respect to the November 18th presentation. So again, the idea or the thinking here is that this new administration will, as a matter of policy, make sure that the taxpayers are paid on a current basis, and that the government does not incur any liabilities as it was the case in the past when it comes to this particular issue. And then lastly, the contingency, which I walked you through, $473 million. So all in all, when you do the math, and I apologize, we didn't separate it here on the page, but when you do the math and you look at the numbers, excluding the HTA, the $82 million for HTA, the tax refunds, and the contingency, you're looking at a positive variance of about $288 million, of which 120 you've already captured on a year-to-date basis. There are clearly, in our estimation, the variance that we are projecting here, or the adjustments to the cash flow based on historical trends in our analysis is a fair number. When you're talking about a $16 billion cash flow movement, this is not a big of a number on a percentage basis, but nonetheless, given the liquidity issues that the Commonwealth is facing right now, any dollar is important. The last thing I want to talk to you about, and then we're happy to answer questions from the board, is key risks associated or embedded in these projections. Some of these you've already seen, and I'm sure you are very aware of these, as you explained in your earlier presentation. I would like to take you to page 8. Again, this presentation focuses on the TSA. We did not do an analysis of the component units that are outside of the TSA. So, and there's at this point still little visibility with respect to a liquidity situation in some of the bigger entities. Clearly you have Prepa Praza, they're big and they have advisors and they've been on top of liquidity. But there are other component units out there that, where there's really not a lot of visibility at this point. So that's one risk associated with this. We listed the trends as a risk. There's a big payment due in the fourth quarter of the fiscal year of about $423 million. That's an important cash outlay that's already embedded here, but wanted to highlight that. Litigation expenses, clearly, the government has been involved in costly litigation over the last number of months. The expectation of the new government is that with the Financial Responsibility and Financial Responsibility Act that's at the legislature, some of those litigations will either end or slow down, but that we highlight as a major risk here, and we want to bring up. The next one is, we should have been the first one really, is pensions. What this cash flow shows as it relates to pensions inflows from the ERS system is that the ERS will continue to make its payments to the central government as scheduled through the end of the year. And when I say as scheduled, that's based on an estimate that was developed earlier in the fiscal year of roughly $57 million a month. My understanding is that there was a new estimate done recently of roughly that showed that the gap was closer to 85, 87 million dollars. Those additional dollars are not in this projection, but that is an issue that obviously needs to be flagged because you know, the pension system will, you know, will have to either liquidate assets or, as you well know, you know, enter into some serious liquidity issues here, you know, probably as soon as the summer. So that's a major issue. And the corollary of that, as you well know, and as it was presented to you in the baseline revision in December, is, or the option is to go pay-go. But the impact on the TSA would be, the estimate is roughly $950 to $1 billion a year. So it's a major issue. Then, you know, ACA funds, we talked about this, you know, significant risk beginning in FY 2018, roughly, you know, 0.8 billion estimate. And lastly, the special revenue funds that, as you know, are those funds that are appropriated but not budgeted, and that, you know, represent a significant cash leakage to the central government. You know, with that said, I don't know if Aurelio or Jeff have anything else to add to the liquidity presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
Maybe just to start, last night the House of Representatives approved an extension of the moratorium bill. I'm wondering if you could discuss some of the main elements of the moratorium extension and how that plays into how you're thinking about things.
Certainly. Yes, You
want to take it or?
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Hello. Thank you for having us here and letting us answer your question. I would ask the chairman that next time he provide a bigger table, if possible. What was approved yesterday by our House was not an extension of the Moratorium Act. It was a new bill, a fiscal responsibility bill that establishes a new public policy for the government of Puerto Rico to recognize its fundamental obligations to provide essential services to its citizenry, and also to recognize the need to honor its obligations with debt holders and other key stakeholders of the government. With that change in policy and that statement being made, the Fiscal Responsibility Act also establishes a legal framework by means where the governor and the government of Puerto Rico can actually define what are those essential services. Currently, the legal framework that exists right now does not provide that. The moratorium establishes across the board a moratorium on payments of all obligations, and then provides just a blank check to expend funds. What we provide in the Fiscal Responsibility Act is a prioritization of essential services that are the reason of being of a government, and then a recognition of the need to pay our debt holders. The Fiscal Responsibility Act also provides additional sections that allow the GDB and the BDE to handle its liquidity and fiscal responsibilities in an organized fashion, whereas if it were just subject to the provisions of its Enabling Act, there would be an unorderly way of expending. The Fiscal Responsibility Act also streamlines a lot of functions that are necessary to handle the cash flow of the government and the operations of the government, and allows the governor and AFAF to streamline those procedures into one line of work, so that we do not have different operations being carried out in silos across the government, as would happen now. So that's why I would not only say it is not an extension of the Moratorium Act, it is actually a new public policy and provides a legal framework so that we can adequately respond to the board, to the markets, and to the public in general.
Is there any overlap between when you establish the priorities under the Fiscal Responsibility Act? Is there any overlap between those priorities that you establish and the existing or soon-to-be existing accounts payable?
Do you mean those to be established in the fiscal plan?
No, not in the fiscal plan. What I mean is you establish priorities under the Fiscal Responsibility Act and you decide what is essential services. Are there related accounts payable that you may determine are not related to essential services that would not get paid?
Well, I believe that what the framework establishes right now is first a way to determine what are essential services. Mm-hmm. What are we going to expand and what is already on the books, correct? I think that is your question. How we are going to attend those accounts payable that are currently existing will in great part depend on the work that's being conducted between AFAF and your counselors.
Can you say, this is just following up on that, can you say a little bit more about how you're going to determine essential services? You said that the law provides a framework. Can you be a little more specific about what that means and what that will look like?
The law provides a framework to determine and to publish that determination to the public. What would be carried out internally in the workflow is first an establishment of a baseline of what are essential services in a practical sense, not merely on a philosophical sense, but also to establish, for example, health care, education to children and adolescents, maintaining of critical infrastructure, for example, roads, so that their deterioration doesn't impact adversely the development of and growth of the Commonwealth, maintaining a court and justice system. So what would be implemented ideally is a decision tree or matrix fashion that could process that workflow.
May I say something? I would like to add something else. Raul Maldonado, Secretary of the Treasury. We have to combine here two things. One is the philosophical things that we are discussing in terms of essential services, but for a practical matter, we are also working on something. For example, we receive invoices from the Health Department or Education Department, and we can assume that they are essential services, but they are not 100% essential services. Mm-hmm. So I have a $2 million invoice that is a global invoice, but then when I get into the invoice, I say, okay, this is payment to teachers, they're payment to technicians that provide services more than a year ago. Probably that's essential. Administrative expenses, that is not essential at this moment. So we have to split every big invoice so we can determine what is essential. So it's not taking something that it comes from an agency that is the police department, for example. Not everything is essential. So we have to go to the nature of the invoices. So we right now are working with that because we know we are going to have a definition, but we have to execute right away. So we cannot pay something because it says police department, it's health department, or it's education. So we have to see the underlying expense incurred there and the underlying expense and the underlying nature of that. So we are working on both things at the same time because we receive calls every day from vendors from every place saying this is essential. And when we look into the invoice, it's not essential 100%. So maybe part of the invoice is essential.
I would just like to remark I think once the Fiscal Responsibility Act is enacted, it is a critical and big step in the progress of what Puerto Rico has done up to now and what it's going to be doing in the future. What happens right now, for example, in the GDB, is that we receive a certification for disbursement of funds from a municipality or a public agency, and we have over 1,400 of those certifications waiting since last year. And we have to go one by one to determine which one goes and which one can wait a little longer. I am pretty sure that that exercise happens across the government, again, in silos. What this act is for the first time going to allow is that we can streamline that in one workflow under one set of priorities. And that has never been done in Puerto Rico. And I think some of you can bear witness to that. So what we are doing is giving the governor and the executive branch the tools it needs to comply with whatever fiscal plan is ultimately certified by the board, and also to respond to the requests and questions of the board in a responsible fashion.
Let me, I think, expand on.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, just to clarify what I think Judge Gonzalez was saying, or at least what I would follow up on his comment. There's a next step that is critical and absolutely essential. When you decide something is a non-essential service and therefore not going to be a priority for payment, given the fact that we're facing an issue of insufficient revenues to cover all the expenses, not just a timing issue. I think the next step is really to avoid just creating a pile of accounts payable that has no source of payment eventually. The next step is really to stop incurring those expenses that you consider non-essential. And that's, I think, the critical next step as you put together a fiscal plan. I'm just saying this, I don't know if that's part of what you were implying, but the question is, what happens to those accounts payable? Are we just loading up the accounts payable?
It comes back, I think, to the last example given. If you look at an invoice today and you say, and after you've developed your priority and say, well, some of that are for expenditures that are not for essential or requests for those not essential services, are you then going to take that?
Stop incurring it.
And just say, A, in the future, we're not going to incur that expense, but B, we're not going to pay the already incurred expense for what we now deem to be not an essential service?
I agree with the general premise of your statement. The intent of this act is not to create a stockpile of unpaid obligations, right? And the resolution of those obligations in great part depends on the work that we are establishing here. But the reforms that we are conducting that Mr. Portela mentioned in his presentation earlier today are directed to resolve that issue in the future. For example, cutting 20% of our trust or at-will employees in the government is a big step. Cutting operational costs in the current budget, as they were budgeted now, is also a big step. So I agree with the general premise of your statement that we definitely need to find a way to responsibly resolve the ones that are there, but also plans that we do not incur in those in the future.
If I might interact 1 second, is it true that this bill needs to be looked at from the context of a greater plan that consists of cuts, a programmatic plan for Puerto Rico that involves shrinking the size of government, a fiscal plan that will be submitted by the government that will meet the requirements of PROMESA? So this is like a link in the chain and not the solution to everything ongoing.
Yes.
So in the context of the question of Judge Gonzalez, this bill, it's pretended, to my understanding, is to give a step so that the government might continue in its proposal to start cutting all non-essential services. I think it's two different issues. One thing is, what do we do with the invoices that are already stockpiled? And the second is, what do we do to stop incurring in those non-essential services? So on the first part, Treasury is dealing with a fact of legal obligations that it already has on the table. But secondly, the FOMB team is working directly with the board on the proposal of the fiscal plan, which will meet the criteria and will eliminate non-essential services.
I would like to add a few things. First of all, although the essential service is an ongoing base, right? We're still working on it. Essential will be set through benchmarking and reasonable standard of living in the U.S. We're going to start with that. On the accounts payable aging, if the Secretary of Treasury would like to add to my comment, I think the essential services will be considered when determining the priority to keep lowering the accounts payable aging. I don't know if you agree with that, but
yeah.
So essential services will be considered when lowering the accounts payable aging. Thank you.
Yes, I guess my approach is very practical on this. Essential services are going to be considered current payables. We're going to try to cover that, depending obviously on the liquidity that we have. But non-essential services, we're going to defer them. But in other jurisdictions, we have seen what they have done, and basically it's like a bankruptcy proceeding. We have to talk to our vendors, and we have to come with a long-term financing probably, and start putting them on a payment plan. And that will probably include discounts, that probably will include the selling of the payables, and having cash on hand, and then we can pay on a more long-term basis. Those are things that we are reviewing right now. But those are things that we will have to execute right away within the next 4 or 5 months. This is not something that we can keep planning. It's to execute at this moment, and it's a business decision for the government. Also, when we see the invoices, for example, I received an invoice last week, 4 or 5 million in services. We received it last week, but the services were provided almost a year ago from one of the agencies. So we have to take a different look at the agent that we have right now based on where the services were provided, not when we received the debts, the invoice.
I don't want to overkill the matter, but perhaps I can add some more procedural comments. I think that there's one of the various initiatives that the current administration has started, which is a zero budget for critical agencies. I think that's a very important thing. What we want to do is the following. We have dues that exist and will have to be sorted out and faced some way. And some of them are essential, so there will be protocol for essential payments. But then what you don't want is to have expenditures or obligations in non-essential. That's future, right? How do you do that? So one of the best tools to confront that is to really deep down into zero budget and for the critical agencies and ask at each different function of each critical agency if the actual function is essential. I mean, education is essential, but not everything in the educational budget is essential. So if you decompress it, understand it, and build it up, bottom up, then you will have a much better way to help the government and the governments and boards ways to prioritize essential services. I think that closes the circle.
And that is
that's,
a very
that's
good
an
way
element
that is, I think, a very good way to summarize what the task ahead is in the budgeting process for the Commonwealth officials. Yes.
Just if I may, I think one of the things that is a challenge in tracking exactly what is the liquidity plan relative to the treatment of essential services is that it seems to be there's a fair amount of conflating between what's the definition of essential services and how that affects budgetary decisions and future appropriations and the fiscal plan, as well as how to treat with expenses that have already been incurred, obligations that have already happened, and how to deal with those accounts payables and what to do in that situation. As well as there are all kinds of issues related to, do priorities for payment apply to dailies or do they apply to monthlies, and how does that work relative to a sinking fund? All to say that appreciate what you've shared with us, and we'll definitely be interested in far more of the specifics to really understand these elements and ensuring that it's not, for example, resulting in creating huge amounts of additional accounts payables that creates additional problems and creates future operating deficits, that potentially creates a future essential services delivery problem if something gets categorized in the wrong place and then the vendor no longer is providing the service, and all the other related issues that deal with these very complicated situations, because what gets treated as an essential service for purposes of budgetary and future decision making, and how to deal with expenses that have been incurred for services that have been delivered and invoices that haven't been paid. It's, as my mother would say, son otro 20 pesos.
Yes, no, we definitely agree, and that I think that is the importance of pointing out that it's not a philosophical exercise, right? It's a practical exercise with a matrix and a decision tree process where we can actually determine what is critical vis-a-vis what is the aspiration of the service, and also compared to what is our capability to fund that service. And I think that goes to close the remark on what we are engaging with, and what the government of Puerto Rico is sending a message to this board is, we are engaging in the capability building that is necessary so that our governor and our team can adequately respond and comply with the work that is being done here today.
And I think the other piece that I'd add to that is you also shared a lot about where the systems are today and where the data is today, and the complexities in being able to provide real-time information and tie out things on a real-time basis, which clearly also is an issue that has an effect relative to having all the information to be able to make these determinations in a manner where one can feel 100% confident that the line is the right line, and avoiding potential future unintended consequences.
Would it be correct to state that the zero-based budgeting executive order, hand in hand with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and the steps taken in alignment with the board and its advisors are geared directly towards complying with this objective?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think you have outlined very clearly basically what would happen moving forward, especially if you're constructing the fiscal plan and the fiscal year 2018 budget. I think still the question and concern might be, and I think you have outlined what are going to be the process and the matrices, but my personal concern is in the next 5 months, I mean, until you get to the end of this current fiscal year, how can you express, if I read correctly, I mean, the proposed bill yesterday is going to establish a mechanism of a lockbox. Because I think one of the critical items for the board, and I think for all the stakeholders, is to be able to get some transparency into what payments are being made. I mean, regardless of the philosophical definition of essential or non-essential, how is the money coming in and how is the money being spent? I mean, we know that right now the revenues are a scarce commodity, and all of us want to know exactly how that goes along. So my suggestion to you as you're developing these matrices, and what is the expectation, at least my expectation, is that more than a policy that outlines the priority of payments, which is critical, is just to try to be able to have that policy, but also to be able to report on a weekly or as frequent as you can. How are you proceeding to make those payments? I understand and appreciate the comments from the Secretary of Treasury that, I mean, this is sometimes more an art than a science, I mean, in order to be able to look into the different things. But I think it is critical to be able to have a lot of transparency into that. And if you're going to be establishing a lockbox mechanism that everything is going into one place and not into many different places, I would hope that you're able to accomplish that. And I will encourage you, I mean, to work really hard as we're looking at this liquidity plan right now to be able to accomplish that.
Okay. Just a very brief note in regards to your comments. Mr. Garcia, we have presented to FAF and to the government a series of protocols to deal with payment of essential services. And those, in our suggestions, should be embedded as part of the weekly review of the cash flow. So when you're talking about a 13-week cash flow, I mean, having it for the sake of having it is, I think, one thing, and then you can really start to use some decision making. So the first thing of the 13-week cash flow is what has varied and why between what we thought was the world or how the world looked like a week ago and now, and it's rolling. But also, what is the pileup of essential payments that we see against the cash availability? And that will be a cycle that needs to make decisions through a protocol that is understandable and easy and effective, and then also transparent. So that is an embedded portion of the weekly reporting of cash that we're trying to put together with the FAF.
Also, it's my understanding and knowledge that I have that the board's advisors are currently working with the AFOP team and there's been some information exchanged in the part of identification of essential services and the outline and next steps. Is that ongoing right now?
Yes, it is.
On a different matter, if I may step back to the beginning of your comments, Mr. Portela, I would like to get more information or more clarity about the current status of the PREPA RSA, Restructuring Support Agreement, and where that stands with respect to the expiration date, the current expiration date, or a possible extension of that RSA.
Well, yes, as I expressed earlier, yesterday we communicated on a press release on the government's intention to extend the RSA to the March 31st, 2017.
And you believe it will be agreed to by the other parties, or do you have a deal, I guess is a question, or?
We believe it will eventually be agreed to, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So your expectation is you will get an extension?
That's the
your current
expectation.
expectation?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Any further questions?
I have a few questions in regards, to some, just looking at this slide number 8. Obviously, with our advisors, we want to get more under the hood of some of these projections to be able to understand them. But one that just jumps at me is just the litigation expenses. Do you have a number in the current fiscal year of how much money has been spent in terms of litigation and advisors?
No, sir, I don't have that, but we can definitely get that to you.
And I think that will be a number that will be good to be reported on.
Certainly.
But that's meant in the context of litigation that could happen as a result of the expiration of the stay. Is that the question, Carlos?
No, I think the question, I know what it's
Just in general.
saying, that it's unpredictable, and
Yeah,
this is one of
that's
the
my point.
challenges. But my specific question is, how much has it been spent already in
Up to
terms of
date.
litigations and advisors to date?
Okay.
So obviously, that will be part of the information to understand, some of the liquidity implications and how much has been spent to date.
We'll get that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Very insightful.
If you allow me, Chairman, I would ask Jeff Addison to walk us through the bridge process and where we are, where we want to get it. Thank you.
The Oversight Board has requested from the government of Puerto Rico an analysis that compares the 2017 fiscal plan baseline to the historical financial results. This analysis is important to establish that the baseline presented in December of $68 billion of deficit over the following 10 years is adequate and is the appropriate base to be used to develop the measures that the board described earlier. The measures impact a number of stakeholders and citizens of the island, so building this foundation in getting the numbers right for a once-and-done approach is important. The government has taken this request seriously and is putting a lot of resources in getting the information in order to provide information to the board that establishes the link between the prior financial statements and the 2017 fiscal plan. Today I'll describe the approach taken so far, preliminary results, and next steps over the following few weeks. At this point, the approach that has been taken is to look at the audited financial statements for 2014 in comparison to the fiscal plan. And the information is presented on a different basis. So we've looked at the data in two groupings. One, within the audited financial statements, there is a reporting of the governmental funds. Governmental funds include the general fund operating fund, special revenue funds, federal funds, along with non-major component units such as PBA. Separately, we've looked at component units and enterprise funds separately that are also presented in the fiscal plan. Another step that has been taken is because the fiscal plan was developed on a different basis than the historical financial results, we've made adjustments so that a direct comparison can be made between the two. For instance, within the governmental funds, the historical financials are presented on a modified accrual basis. What that means is there's certain accruals, such as collections that are collected after the fiscal year that are accounted for in the fiscal year presented in the financial results. In the fiscal plan, the way the revenue is projected covers all collections within the fiscal year. So that's a timing adjustment that's been adjusted for comparison purposes. Additionally, other adjustments have been made to remove significant one-time items that are not expected to recur in the future. For example, in 2014, there's a loan loss reserve reported at the Government Development Bank of $2.6 billion, which is not recurring in the fiscal plan. So as we look at the initial results of governmental funds, after we go through the normalization process, what the initial results indicate is that 2017, as compared to 2014, shows a benefit of $350 million. This benefit is primarily attributable to higher revenue, driven by increased sales and use tax from 7 to 11.5%, also petroleum tax, which increased by $6.25 per gallon. Over this same time period, what the data indicates is that expenditures are at a consistent level. Separately, for the component units, what we see from 14 to 17 is a benefit of nearly $200 million. The benefit of $200 million between 14 and 17 is primarily driven by an increase from the Health Insurance Administration, whereby the federal funds reimbursement rate has increased from approximately 51% to 58%. That benefit is over $200 million, and so all the other component units and enterprise funds on a net basis combined represent only a $20 million variance over that time period. This analysis on the governmental side is limited to the audited financial statements of 2014, and on the component unit side, we've used both audited financial statements for 2014, and a majority of the entities have reported audited financial statements for 15. I'll next talk about the process in which we normalized the governmental funds and walk through the comparison of numbers that you can see in the historical audited financials in the fiscal plan. In the first column for historical financials, row 4 is governmental funds. This negative $3.8 billion is shown on page 42 and represents the deficit before other financing sources and uses. In order to present on a like basis and to avoid variability of certain projected items such as debt, capital expenditures, and pensions, we've adjusted those out. And so for comparative purposes, our starting point of the governmental funds for 2014 is $960 million. For the fiscal plan, shown in the second column, the base financing gap presented in December for 2017 had a deficit of $3.6 billion. Adjustments were made to remove the non-governmental aspect of that. So we're looking at, on a similar basis, governmental funds versus government funds. And then separately, we've also made similar adjustments to remove debt and other items not included in the fiscal plan, such as the global tobacco settlement, which is revenue attributable to the Children's Trust and outside of the fiscal plan. After these adjustments are made, the analysis indicates $1.3 billion surplus. As mentioned before, this comparison shows an increase of $350 million, and it's driven by sales and use tax, higher petroleum tax, and it's offset by lower income taxes due to changes in law. Also, in the fiscal plan, there is no projected amnesty collections, which were significant during 2014 and other prior years. And there's also declining economic activity attributed to this offset. As you can see, the expenses remain at a similar level of $16 billion over time. The question is, what can be gleaned from this analysis? And at this point, Since we're only comparing 1 year, this analysis is not conclusive enough for the new administration to say, yes, we agree that the numbers in the fiscal plan are valid, or whether an adjustment needs to be made. I think what I'll discuss the process in a few moments, but I think what the government would like to do to get behind these numbers is to provide and work through additional financial reporting and more detailed analysis to confirm, primarily on the expenditure side, that the basis should be at a similar rate or a different level. For the component units and enterprise funds, we use a similar methodology with the historical financials. First, we excluded entities not included in the fiscal plan, such as PREPA and PRASA. Separately, we've looked at this on an operating basis. And in that respect, we've removed depreciation, amortization, and interest expense. We've also normalized for certain adjustments. In 2014, for example, there was a $2.6 billion write-off at GDB for loan loss reserves that have been normalized. And as a result of the significant change in operations at GDB, for comparative purposes, we've shown this net of the GDB impact. For the fiscal plan, we've also made similar adjustments, and certain items in the fiscal plan include working capital items, certain pay downs, and so we've removed that to be on a comparative basis. At this point, what the analysis indicates is that 2014 versus 2018, there's a benefit of $200 million, and again, this is primarily attributable to the increase in federal funds reimbursement rate from assess. As we look at the trend from fiscal 15 to fiscal 17, they're very similar in nature. And at this time, the government is analyzing this information to get comfortable. But I think on the component unit and enterprise fund side of things, the available historical financial data is in a much more recent state than on the governmental fund side.
So if I may, I just wanted to ask a question. My understanding, based on the discussion with our consultants, is that there's still a bunch of work that's going on back and forth regarding this information, and then at this juncture, it's preliminary. And essentially, we appreciate the work that the government has been taking to be able to validate the bridge and understand exactly what we're looking at. But I just want to confirm that there's a lot of work to be done here, and that the information we're looking at is preliminary. And folks will be working with all deliberate speed to try to get to a place of making sure that we understand the full bridge, and clearly understanding 15 and 16 is critical to be able to ensure that the 16 to 17 launching point makes sense, no?
That's right.
All right.
And on the following slide, slide 8, I wanted to walk through what the steps are.
Great.
So the government has a plan in place to complete further analysis for both 15 and 16. The government just took office this month, and so in addition to building up its staff, is trying to get acclimated to the historical financial reporting as well as the ongoing financial reporting. And just to give you a sense of where things stand on the governmental side, fund side of things, the trial balance for fiscal year 2015, which ended over 18 months ago, was just finalized and submitted to the auditors in January. And so previously information was provided in the Commonwealth report. However, that information may change based on this updated information. Separately, the government is working to close 2016. 2016 financial statements have not been closed on a monthly basis or on an annual basis. And so the Department of Treasury is sending out a circular letter either yesterday or on Monday that will demand the entities to close their books so that 2016 can also be finalized. The Department of Treasury is putting a lot of resources on this, and it understands the importance of this information in order to validate the baseline of the fiscal plan. One other thing, there's a lot of bank reconciliations that are delinquent, and the reason is because of the transition from GDB to Banco Popular. There's been a lot of IT-related issues that have been worked through, and those steps are ongoing in order to close the books. The government believes that over the next month, these activities will take place and will provide the board and its advisors updates on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I have a question for the Secretary of Treasury, and I know it's only been 27 days, which is a very short period of time, but obviously we're all very interested in understanding the status of the audits, both for fiscal year 2015 and 2016. So based on your conversations, I mean, can you give us an idea of, I mean, I know some of the challenges. The question is, when do you expect that significant progress will be made? And when is the time that you can establish when those two audited financial statements could be delivered? Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we during this week, we decided a working plan for that, and it will require for us to deploy a lot of assets in some of the critical agencies. So the information for audit purpose, we can obtain it right away. So within the next 30 days, we don't have a clear picture of when we expect to issue the financial statements. We are working with the current auditors on that, and we are looking to not only to do the 2015 audit. So we are looking to start working with the 2016 in some of the working papers that can be done, because we can do both at the same time. It's not probably the ideal work for an auditor, but we can accelerate a lot of the work. So within the next 30 days, we will have a timetable presented to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional comments, questions? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving right along, 6th point of today's agenda, consideration of the governor's request for fiscal plan and stay extensions. On certain conditions set forth in Promesa, section 405D1B, the board is allowed to extend Promesa stay from February 15th, 2017 through May the 1st, 2017. Specifically, the stay may be extended if, quote, the Oversight Board delivers a certification to the governor that, in the Oversight Board's sole discretion, an additional 75 days are needed to seek to complete a voluntary process under Title VI of this Act with respect to the government of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico or any of its territorial instrumentalities, unquote. Pursuant to Section 106E of Promesa, there shall be no jurisdiction in any United States District Court to review challenges to the Oversight Board certification determinations under this Act. Nothing in Promesa, however, empowers the Board to extend Promesa's Section 405 stay beyond May the 1st of 2017. Therefore, after that date, if a stay against enforcement of creditors' claims is required to maintain the integrity of the Commonwealth or any other covered entity, only a Title III case can provide a stay. The board has made clear that it strongly prefers to restructure all debt under Title VI of Promesa, and it will continue to strive to do so. Even if the board must commence Title III cases to obtain a stay that will protect the Commonwealth's ability to provide essential services, the board will continue to seek solutions possible in Title VI. By letter dated January 22nd, 2017, the governor's representative, Mr. Sanchez, responded to the board's conditions for extending the Promesa stay and the time for submission of a fiscal plan. While the letter takes issue with the board's condition of working towards a once-and-done approach to structural balance, we do not believe the parties are at odds. The board's insistence on a one-and-done approach refers to the need to do the necessary changes to attain structural balance as soon as possible, and in the board's view, that is fiscal 2019. Once and done does not mean that as facts change, the 10-year fiscal plan cannot be modified to adjust said facts. The fiscal plan will be a dynamic document, as pointed out by Mr. Garcia, and should be revised at least annually. Hopefully, the economy will improve and the fiscal plan can be amended to provide more services to the public and more debt service to creditors. The need to attain structural balance on a once-and-done approach, however, cannot be compromised. The governor has been clear that he agrees with the board that the Commonwealth should not procure short-term liquidity loans. Additionally, the board is pleased the governor has agreed to provide the board rolling 13-week cash forecasts and to bridge the 2014 audited financials to the baseline fiscal plan scenario. The board is pleased as well that the governor has agreed to collaborate with the board on creditor negotiations. The board representatives and the governor's representatives will invite each other to all creditor meetings and negotiations, and the governor's representatives will take the leading role in those negotiations. Our joint participation should assure creditors that they will not be retraded and should avoid inconsistent positions. While the board and its advisors and consultants have been focusing on the fiscal plan, they have also been active meeting with creditors. The board has hosted over 10 creditor meetings and has attended numerous creditors meetings hosted by the government. The board and its advisors have met, among others, with representative of holders of GEO bonds, PREPA debt, senior and junior COFINA bonds, the GDB debt, the Conventure Center debt, PRHTA debt, and the PRASA debt, and the UPR debt, the pension bonds. Additionally, the board has met with at least 3 monoline insurers. The board has learned about negotiations with the government prior to the recent election and deal terms previously under consideration. Under all these circumstances, the board would like to provide the governor until February 28, 2017 to provide its fiscal plan and to extend PROMESA stay subject to PROMESA's requirements. Now, Mr. Sanchez would like to make a statement.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the board, and to the general public present. First off, the administration would like to thank the Oversight Board for the timeliness in which the integration of the work groups have begun since the governors were in office. I acknowledge in the beginning of your statement, Chairman, where you stated, unfortunately, the outgoing governor declined to revise his proposed fiscal plan that the board had declined to certify. And the new governor, inaugurated this month, understandably requests more time. There's been a change in administration and a change in policy. Whereas in the past, the attitude was that of no collaboration, this new administration comes with a clear intent in collaborating and being part of the solution and not simply the problem. We understand that this is key to be able to extend the dates petitioned by the government, whereas the board needs to meet certain requirements to prove ongoing good faith negotiations and to prove that there is a coherent fiscal plan being worked upon. I would also like to acknowledge as well your statement in the beginning stating, importantly, the board also acknowledges the governor's ability to make policy decisions that deviate from the board's recommendations, as long as they produce sufficient savings and increased revenues to accomplish PROMESA requirements with a substantial degree of certainty acceptable to the board. In that we are aligned, and that is the focus of the governor's letter this month in response to your January 18th letter. The governor really wants to be a part of the solution, and will be providing, along with the team from AFAF, the GDB, the Treasury, and the OMB of Puerto Rico, alternatives and solutions that can give a clear path and reach the targets that the Oversight Board has assessed. I thank you as well for clearing up the statement as to what once and done means. In that sense, we can go over the conditions that were set and how the AFAF team has presented in its presentation. And the commitment to a once and done approach that achieves structural balance without short-term liquidity loans or near-term financing, we are aligned. Development and implementation of a liquidity plan that addresses anticipated cash shortfalls, at least through the duration of the stay, the draft was presented today. The 13-week cash flow, the rolling cash flow forecast report, the draft is being presented today. The bridge between 2014 audited financial statements and fiscal plan-based scenario, draft presented today as well. Schedule of important milestones, that was completed. Establish a clear joint working arrangement, information sharing protocol and work plan, that has been completed as well. Title VI negotiations conducted will be joint coordination between the board and the government, that is currently aligned. So, Mr. Chairman, we understand that the experience of the past has been an administration that was not willing to work, was not willing to meet its obligations. That policy has changed as of January 2nd, 2017, under the administration of Dr. Ricardo Rosselló. We have complied with the conditions set forth for the extension. We appreciate the board's willingness to consider this fact and to entertain it today and assess it directly here in this public hearing. And we want to continue this collaboration so that Puerto Rico can have a solution that, above all things, restores economic growth. That should be our north, our objective, and in that sense, Mr. Chairman, we are completely aligned.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez. Professor Skill?
I'd like now, based on what we've heard, to make the following motion for a resolution, and I'll read the.
I'm sorry. I just had a quick question relative to the scope of the fiscal plan, and we appreciate how well our teams are working together. Just one question, making sure that is the plan for the fiscal plan that is submitted to the board to include the assessment and the fiscal estimates for the legislation that has been proposed and is considered, and/or legislation that has been enacted, and ensuring that those fiscal estimates are forecasted.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
that will be a part.
Thanks.
So now I'll make the motion. Resolved, the board shall extend to February 28, 2017, the deadline for the Commonwealth to submit a fiscal plan to the board, and shall extend the PROMESA stay in accordance with PROMESA Section 405 by delivering its certification to the governor, because the board concludes an additional 75 days are needed to seek to complete a voluntary process under Title VI of this Act with respect to the government of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico or any of its territorial instrumentalities. The February 28th deadline is designed to allow revisions prior to the board's deadline of March 15, 2017 for certifying a fiscal plan.
All right. I second the motion.
May I have a show of hands, please? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All of the board members having voted in favor, the resolution is passed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, gracias por el voto de confianza.
Moving on to point 7, discussion on milestones and a timeline for fiscal plans of covered entities. Would like to ask Mr. Garcia to comment on the timelines of fiscal plans of covered entities.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As we heard today from Mr. Portela, and also as we were informed by McKinsey, the advisors to the board, the timeline that is enclosed in the board materials for the central government fiscal plan has been discussed and agreed between the parties, and I would recommend its adoption by the board and its formal notification to the government of Puerto Rico. Just to provide the highlights, in the first week of February, the expectations on that timelines are that the government will be providing an outline of the fiscal plan initiatives, that the bridge, as it was discussed today and it's in progress, will be completed, and also that we will receive the final 13-week cash flow and also the final liquidity plan. Then the next milestone will be that on February 21st, the content of the fiscal plan will be finalized, so it will provide the ability to be able to revise the economic assumptions and revenue forecast. Then, as it has just been approved, then by February 28th, the fiscal plan will be formally submitted by the government to the board, so it provides sufficient time for the board to be able to review the plan, so the board may certify a plan by March 15th. And the final but also very important deadline will be March 31st, which will be the date to provide the actual implementation plans of all the major initiatives that are included within that plan. I also, Mr. Chairman, would like to suggest that the following covered entities be requested to submit a first draft of their fiscal plans by no later than February 21st of 2017. Those will be the Aqueduct and Sewer Authority, the Electric Power Authority, the Government Development Bank for Puerto Rico, the Highways and Transportation Authority, and the Public Corporation for the Supervision and Insurance of Cooperatives, better known as COSEC. I would suggest that the deadline for the University of Puerto Rico for the first draft of their fiscal plan be further extended from that other deadline to March 31st, 2017, since some of the critical decisions of that fiscal plan will be included in the Commonwealth fiscal plan to provide appropriate time for that to be done. So basically, those are my recommendations, Mr. Chair, to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
I'd like to make a motion to that effect with these timelines. Resolved, the board shall adopt the timeline enclosed for the central government fiscal plan and requests that the following covered entities submit a first draft fiscal plan no later than February 21, 2017. And the five entities here are Aqueduct and Sewer Authority, Electric Power Authority, Government Development Bank, Highway and Transportation Authority, Public Corporation for the Supervision and Insurance of Cooperatives, or COSAC. Further, that the University of Puerto Rico submit a first draft fiscal plan no later than March 31, 2017. These deadlines shall be notified to the government of Puerto Rico.
I second the motion.
Show of hands, please.
Aye.
All in favor? Thank you. Having all members voted in favor, the resolution is passed. Thank you very much. Lastly, before the adjournment is the time for public comment from invited guests and folks who have registered. The board would now like to open for public comments. I'd like to point out that this is not the press conference portion of the event. That will come later. So we'd like to listen to comments and no particular question. Everybody has up to 3 minutes to express their views as they like. Any person interested in a turn, please stand up. Once I recognize you, the microphone will be turned on. Please state your full name and speak as clearly as possible. We will adjourn the public comment session no later than 45 minutes from now.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Alfonso Fernandez. My question to the board, do you expect to come to an agreement with creditors regarding the debt restructuring by the new deadline on May 1st? And do you have the possibility under PROMESA to extend the legal stay further?
You want to take that? Do you want to answer it or do you not want to answer it? I'm happy not to say no. We're not answering questions.
I think the answer to the first part, we're certainly hopeful that resolutions can be reached by that date. It would be, I think, an extremely difficult process, but we're always hopeful. In terms of extending the stay further, I think it was stated earlier that there is no provision under PROMESA to extend the stay without the commencement of a Title III process after May 1st.
Just a friendly reminder, this is not a press conference, it is a comment section. We'll be attending the press after this section, so anybody have any comments? Going once? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Giancarlo Gonzalez. My comments would be, in the 21st century, the policy will not work unless the technology works. And I guess my comment would be that in the digital, we need to make sure that we use digital structures and strategies to radically rethink lowering the cost of delivering services while radically improving it. And if our mindset is just lowering the cost, we're going to scale back default ways of doing things that were maybe 50% successful, but we should perhaps go for something that could be radically better at a radically lower cost. And I know that PROMESA allows for detailing federal employees, and the governor has requested detailing the top talent that was employed at the federal government through the U.S. Digital Service. I hope that this is taken into account. I think it would be essential in making sure we achieve efficiency, transparency, and economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. Any comments? Any additional comments?
Good morning, Jorge San Miguel. What are the board's thoughts in terms of the treatment of Puerto Rico with respect to Medicare funds? And the second part would be if you believe that there is the ability to leverage some additional federal funds given the fiscal plan that's being developed.
Well, so on the Medicare issue, just to point out, as I know it will come out in the, it'll be broached in the press portion. What we're saying is that it's not that we're opposed or we're not opposed to even helping assisting the administration and the people of Puerto Rico in procuring additional funds. In fact, whenever we are tasked with meetings in Washington related to Promesa, we always deal with this particular issue. We make an effort to make clear how important those funds are to the people of Puerto Rico and to the medical infrastructure. We are not opposed to assisting in moving that issue forward. Before Judge Gonzalez wanted to clarify his initial comment.
I just want to clarify something about the stay. There is a process within Title VI if an agreement, I think, I don't have the language in front of me, but I believe an agreement in principle is reached, and it's a matter of going out and getting the necessary votes to see if the Title VI can be completed. There is a way of asking a court to extend it another 50 days. But my response was really more directed at your question that seemed to indicate if a settlement resolution isn't reached by May 1st, is there a way to extend it?
Thank you, Judge. Any other comments?
Hello, my name is Roy Gale, and this is a comment section. So I just want to make a comment that myself and a lot of families are watching, and we just hope that we can turn Puerto Rico around, because me and myself am considering going back to the States. I don't want to, but we're behind you. We want to see something really happen, but not just a Band-Aid. Let's cure this so that we can entice people to move back to our island. I think that'll be the best for all concerned, and that's my comment.
Thank you. Don't pack yet. Give us an opportunity.
Hello.
No, lo que sea, no hay problema.
Now, very much along those lines, I would like to congratulate both the board and the current administration in engaging in this once and for all solution, once and done, de una vez por todas.
Sí.
Along those lines, formal negotiation with bondholders or even short-term financing before reaching a fiscal plan, it's not worth it. I think that the approach that we're pursuing right now, it's the right approach, and I'm hopeful that that young man can stay in Puerto Rico.
No, thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Good morning. Name is John Mudd. I just wanted to comment at what Judge Gonzalez was mentioning. It's in the Title VI, 60 days if you go to the federal court and ask for that extension. But in addition, you can always do a forbearance agreement like in the Prepa case was done if there is actual willingness on the parties. And I think there is a big willingness of everybody to try to settle this, even after the May 1st, or even after Title III, as I've been involved in cases with Judge Gonzalez in which there was settlements and things done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any additional comments? Very good. Well, thank you very much. Since we have no other matters to cover, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Show of hands for the adjournment.
Aye.
Aye. All members having voted in favor, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much. We'll have a press portion afterwards.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Ahora pasamos a la conferencia de prensa. Necesitamos que las demás personas y los demás invitados pues salgan del salón para que dejar espacio a la prensa. Gracias.
Yeah, that would be great. That'd be great, yeah.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You were a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to hold on to that?
Thank you.
Very, very nice. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Great job. Press conference.
Aquí mismo, ¿no?
Stay here. Yes, please.
No te caigas esta vez, Carlos. Que una vez tuviste suerte, la segunda se te pidió el tobillo. No, I would say be careful. Last time he fell, he was lucky. He went around. The next time he would have a broken ankle.